Everybody, and you're very welcome to this evening's webinar, the latest in our community support webinar series, which of course this year is replacing our community support seminar series. This series of online events is sponsored by SuperValu, and it's our way of trying to provide the community with support, guidance, and opportunities to learn during what has been a really difficult time for us all during the COVID-19 pandemic. In recent weeks, we've been receiving a huge volume of correspondence in relation to the return to school. We're hearing from young people and families who are very eager to return to the classroom, but have lots of anxiety and concerns about how this will work and the supports that they will receive. We've also heard from many young people who maybe are very anxious and nervous about the return to school and require support and guidance in making that transition. As you might be aware, that throughout the pandemic, SuperValu has been supporting our efforts to support the community in this regard. And we recently published our Bridge Back to School workbook, which I think you'll find really useful in preparing your young person, or if you're a young person yourself, and preparing for the return to school. And that booklet can be downloaded free of charge from our own website or from the SuperValu website. So after tonight's webinar, I would definitely recommend checking that out. We're in for, I think, a really positive discussion tonight about how we can support our young people successfully back to school. And we have 4 fantastic speakers that I know you're going to really enjoy listening to, really enjoy hearing their perspectives, and will learn an awful lot from. Before I introduce them, I just want to give you some basic housekeeping. At the very end of tonight's webinar, after our 4 speakers, we'll take questions. At any stage during the webinar, if you have a question, you can type it in the Q&A box. I will try and select a cross-section of questions to put to our speakers at the end of this evening. I can't promise we'll be able to answer all your questions, and if we don't get to it, please do email the organisation and we'll be very happy to try and assist you directly in that regard. But you can type your questions there and that's how we'll come to them. I would remind people that tonight's seminar is being recorded for those who can't attend or have registered and haven't been able to attend. And as well as that, what I would just ask people is, in asking a question, to try and not make the question having any identifiers. So make sure that you don't name any child, any school, any organization. Keep your questions general so that I can put them to the speakers and that the speakers can answer them comfortably. The format for this evening, I'm delighted that the first two speakers we're going to hear from, Tom Finnan and Jacob Mallon, are members of the AsIAm youth leadership team. And they are young people who've recently finished school, and they'll share their experiences during lockdown and what they think can be done to support students at this juncture. We'll then hear from Sean Greville. Many people know Sean as a former advisor with the National Council for Special Education, and he's a fantastic advocate of the autism community who's just recently returned to the classroom, and he's preparing to open 3 autism classes in a couple of weeks' time. So he's lots of first-hand experience of how this support can work practically. And then I have to say, I'm really excited to welcome somebody who I feel like I know, but I've actually only met virtually for the first time a few minutes ago, Ppe Warmby. Pete is an autistic teacher from the UK, and many people will know him from Twitter, where he shares his experiences and his 2 perspectives, and I think supports a lot of people in that regard. So Pete's going to be talking a little bit from a second level perspective, how we can support students in making this transition. So without further ado, you're very welcome. And I'm delighted to introduce Tom, who's going to speak to us for 5 to 7 minutes about his experiences during lockdown and how he thinks we can prepare students for the return to school.
All right, thanks. So when this whole thing began, I didn't know what to expect from it, since it was the first time I had ever been in this sort of pandemic. We were all just sitting at home. There was some stuff we could do, obviously, but I guess things were just a lot more limited than you would expect. Um, so I did. So I did start helping around, and as the restrictions lifted, I did start to help more and more around, and overall, a lot of it does feel like it's been interesting to try a bunch of new things, and even then, even with schoolwork still to be done, it's felt quite odd having to speak to teachers via voice calls and all that, and I'm just it was just a whole thing, especially when doing one final assignment that we were meant to do at school at home. I didn't know what to expect from that. So after all of the school stuff has officially ended, and we finally got into the holiday, I wasn't sure how much of a difference there was between before or after, considering why it happened again. Um, and And while I am, and to some extent, I am at least happy to get some work done off it. Uh, And we did, of course, get to do some more work after restrictions, but I guess sometimes that it wasn't always for the best when the restrictions were open, as we've seen with Ireland. Um, anyway, oh yeah, with the opening for school week, at least in college, coming within a week, there are definitely a lot of questions in my head about how this is going to go down. As far as somewhere, at least for me, it's going to be one day or week we head into school, and the rest we just spend outside classes to do some work. Hopefully, hopefully I can get through all this, and we can sort everything out. At least everyone should at least be more aware of those with autism than others, since they might have a bit of trouble trying to navigate the world. Since it just felt like a whole lot of change at once. I mean, it. I guess it just. I mean, when I first saw shops with much more reduced with capacity, it just felt a bit more odd and creepy. So just be sure that if you know that someone you know has the condition, try to see if you can find a way to help them get through it, and see what you can do to get them to be active. Um, that's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tom, for sharing your experiences and providing your tips. I know that people will find them really useful. And what I also just want to take an opportunity to say, obviously, we're really proud of having our youth leadership team here tonight and the work that they've been doing during lockdown. And if you're a teacher or a parent, what might really interest you to check out is on the homepage of the AsIAm website. You can see the Lockdown Unlock campaign, which is a campaign that our young people are running at present to give advice to both peers and teachers about how they can support our community in the return to school. There's a treasure trove of resources that's still being built all the time that Tom and Jacob have contributed to, and I would definitely recommend checking it out. So thank you so much, Tom, and we might hear more from you a little bit later on. So thank you so much.
I'll do it
Um,
then.
I just also meant to say in my introduction as well that we're obviously all using technology. So if you see any of our fingers or anything during the course of the evening, it's probably because we're scrolling through our notes. So just so you're aware of that. I'm delighted to introduce Jacob now, who's also in our youth leadership team, who's going to speak both from his own experiences and his experiences of someone who also has a brother who's also on the autism spectrum. So Jacob, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you, Tom, for going first. Hi, all. My name is Jacob. I've been a member of the AsIAm youth leadership team for the last 2 years. This will be my first time speaking in this sort of manner, addressing this many people, so bear with me and hopefully we can all learn something useful today. I have just finished 6th year and I'm currently awaiting my Leaving Cert results. As you know, the exams were cancelled due to COVID-19, so my results will be calculated. And here's hoping that I get what I need to get into my course, though I cannot say much about that as of now. As part of my presentation, I talked with my younger brother, Ethan, as he, like many of you, will be returning to school soon. He spends half his classes in the mainstream and half his classes in an autism unit. When Ethan does return, he will be in 3rd year, which will make this his first time in an exam year. A thought I know myself is already scary, as I'm sure many of you can attest to, whether you've done it already or are set to do so in the future. Sorry about that. During the initial stages of lockdown, I found things rough. My motivation was gone, and it was a struggle to do schoolwork and much of anything. Any understanding of what was to happen over the next few months leading up to my exam date was shot. I found myself unable to sit down and do the work that was assigned to me. Often when I did try to work, I would find it hard to understand what tasks I was being asked to do, as I was full of anxiety. I had projects underway that would have been worked up to 50% of the overall Leaving Cert result in some subjects that I was not able to do anything with during quarantine because of restrictions limiting my work to the class time. I would ask my teachers for information in relation to this, which was already a hard thing to do, as I experienced severe anxiety while sending these teachers the messages. This was detrimental, however, to my mental state, as no good answers were available. Teachers either responded with the same deadlines regardless, or with no knowledge themselves. Eventually, the deadlines were extended, which, while it felt like a saving grace at the time, sorry, while it felt like a saving grace at the time, it was ultimately basically looking back, and as I actually realized closer to the time of the second deadline, it only prolonged the anxiety I was feeling before. Of course, eventually the news came out of calculated grades. There was little clarity, however, that week, other than how they could determine our grades based on some pieces of work we had done in the past. Misinformation and speculation on how it would or would not be ran rampant at the time, only extending the anxiety for myself and many others. For some, a source of comfort was achieved when one source would say something that suited their needs, and for others, it would, in their minds, guarantee a failed leaving cert. Obviously, we do not know the end result yet. Anxiety levels have reduced, though, for me personally, with the realization that I have done my part and can do no more now. Though, check back with me next week, I might feel differently. If I were returning to secondary school this year, I honestly would not be excited. Then again, I never have been. What helped me to return to school and get through school was good support from a home that I cannot understate, and knowing it would not last forever. Another thing for me was my own drive to do well and succeed in my exams. My brother Ethan said he was not particularly excited for school on one hand, but on the other hand is happy to get back to his education, as it brings him back to a form of normality. Ethan likes the routine of going to school. He's just not as much of a fan of homework. There are a few things that have made me nervous and worried about the return to school after summer for both my brother and friends who will be also returning to school, such as the uncertainty around the changes to rules and regulations in order to prevent the spread of COVID to the students, as well as the heightened chance of exposure to COVID-19. Also, the lack of forewarning and information from the schools, which has actually been an issue in past years. Obviously, this is not entirely the school's fault, but if you look at it from the perspective of the students who will be returning to school, especially for autistic students who require routine and structure to feel safe, but possibly others too. My brother had his own worries, such as how will social distancing work in small rooms, as well as the uncertainty around wearing a mask full time, saying that he's not fond of the idea, but is also afraid of getting sick, so hopes that he will be able to deal with it should that be the route that the school chooses to go down. As for things you can do, me and my brother both had our own suggestions. So check-in would be a big one. Ask how they are doing. See that they are not struggling to do the work or re-enter the school routine. On top of that, a gradual or taking time in terms of getting students and people with autism back into the routine instead of having everything go back to normal on day one. As for most, for everyone, we've been out of school for around 6 months now. It has been a long time. As well as listening being one of the things I can't stress enough. Oftentimes, people come and will look to tell parents or teachers the issues or struggles they are dealing with, which in that case, the best thing you can do is listen and take on board what they're saying and try to work with one another to make it easier. My brother also had his own suggestions, such as make classes a bit less cramped. My brother's autism unit, my brother feels that his autism unit called Michaela will likely give him some space, which is good for him. However, he is aware that not everyone has access to this, particularly those like me who attended full mainstream, who have autism. He also said that he would like to see some good explaining and transparency ahead to know what to expect before going into school, as well as a few shorter days to ease back into the return to school. None of these things have been announced to be planned by the schools as of yet. I feel that none of these are particularly difficult to accomplish, but would have a big impact for those returning to school, regardless of disabilities or not. Just to finish, sorry, my notes are all glitching up on me. While these points and the point of this webinar is help people like me and my brother who have autism or autism spectrum disorder, many of the advice and tips I said throughout are applicable to those with other disabilities or none at all. School can be tough for anyone in the best of circumstances, so be kind and look out for one another. Keep in mind what I have said, not just for those you know who I share a disability with, but others you interact with, regardless of whether you are a parent, student, or teacher watching this. And most importantly, if you are watching this, be kind to yourself. And now I will leave you to Adam.
Thank you so much, Jacob. That was a terrific contribution, and I know people will take a lot from it. I think what people mightn't be aware of, this is both Jacob and Tom's first time to speak for AsIAm, and I think you'll agree, both have really shed a lot of light on the issues that we're here to talk about this evening. So we really appreciate it, and we're looking forward as well to your contribution during the Q&A session. So that kind of, I think, is just an overview of some of the challenges that I think many people will be feeling right now, and many people will have heard in recent weeks. So what we want to do is really think in a positive way this evening. How are we going to address some of those challenges, and how are we going to make sure that the much needed return to school for our community is a successful, happy and inclusive one. So I'm delighted to introduce Sean, who's going to speak to us about how we can support our young people back into primary school settings.
Thanks very much, Adam. I'm just going to share my screen here now. Okay. Okay, and again, thank you very much to Adam for giving me the privilege of working with AsIAm again, and thanks very much to Jacob and Tom there for their insight. I actually hope to get through this because I'm in lockdown awfully, by the way, and as I look out the window, I can see thunder and lightning. So hopefully I will get through this. But as Adam has said, I've worked for the NCSE for the past 5 years, and I'm getting ready just to go back to school right now for the first time in 5 years. And sorry, I need to go back to that. Technology. But yeah, and I have been giving presentations for the best part of 15 years, but I don't think I've ever been as nervous about giving a presentation before because of everything that the two guys just spoke about there, because there are so many unknowns, and just like Jacob said there, unknowns and misinformation can cause so much anxiety. And as I look at this slide that I would use in a lot of the, I've used it with children, certainly, but I've often used it in teacher training as well. And when I look at this slide, I'm just looking at, and I'm asking yourselves to look at this too, and how are you feeling right now? And if I look at the 5 emotions there and the 5 visuals there, I've gone through every single one of those 5 things in the past hour, but also in the past couple of weeks leading up to this, and I'm sure I'm going to in the next couple of weeks leading up to going back to school. Because again, there are so many uncertainties, and there's just so many unknowns. And I think until we actually get back to the classroom and get children back to school, where we can start to make tiny little adjustments that will make life easier for everybody. So again, if you look at that yourself, just be, I suppose, conscious of your own state of anxiety, but also keep an eye on the state of our children. But also for those of you who are teachers out there, or SNAs, or even school principals, because I know there are probably a few of you there, keeping an eye out for each other, because I know there's been this saying since COVID came to Ireland about we're all in this together, and it's a bit of a trite statement. But I would certainly feel that as we approach going back to school in the next week or so, that we have to be in this together, staff, teachers, management, parents, children. care staff, etc. We have to be in this together because we all have to form opinions on what is going to work best for us and for the children in schools, and for parents, of course. So, and I'm just going to maybe talk a little bit about how we can try to help that happen. The interesting study that was done in DCU recently, you can see by the DCU School of Psychology there. And as you're all probably aware, DCU do fantastic work and research around autism. And what they found was a decline in their child's ability to self-regulate their emotions. So 34% of children, this is affected. 18% studied a decline in motivation to engage in activities, including schoolwork. And that's very, very understandable when you're so remote from it. And then a decline in academic skills, such as maths, reading, and writing. 14% of the people would have found that. So what we're really seeing there is that kind of regression that we would see in skills. And quite often we would see that regression over summer holidays anyway, but it has been exacerbated by it being a longer period of time, but also by remote learning. And I know a lot of students have been back for July provision and summer provision. But as we know, summer provision and July provision is quite different to school in that quite often it's more socially based, a lot more activities, and there are things like no school uniforms, no other students in the school, etc. So there's a lot of pressure to, I suppose, to perform is off the students. And then 74% of parents reported the unique challenges their children will face on the lifting of restrictions and returning to school. And like I say, I'm living in Offaly and I'm waiting with bated breath tonight to find is lockdown being lifted. I'm not expecting it to be. So difficulties with social skills due to lack of social interaction. And again, what I'm hearing from a lot of parents is there haven't been many opportunities for social interaction. And then the challenges for their child in understanding and adhering to the social distancing and the public health guidelines. And again, we're encouraging everyone to use as many visuals and as many of the department visuals, the Department of the HSE and the Department of Education visuals as possible. And again, I will show you some resources later on for making things as visual, as clear to students as possible. And that could be by using social stories. I love using this this visual in some of my courses as well, because what you see here, quite often I would ask people what do they see in that picture, and a lot of neurotypical people would say, oh my God, look at them, they're feeling very, very sorry for the guy, he must have had some bad news. But again, what a lot of my neurodivergent students would say is, oh my God, would they ever leave him alone? So we have to look at the different perspectives. So basically what I'm saying is we have to look out for what lies beneath with the student. And in particular for our teachers and our SNAs and our management of schools, the masking that we all know can go on for our students, that the keeping it in school, trying to conform, trying to fit it in, and not having the chance to self-regulate and to emotionally regulate themselves, particularly when we're going back after 6 months, particularly when what everyone has been through. And again, I refer back to what Jacob said there about how much misinformation caused him anxiety. And again, we have to look at the information that we've been given and the information that we are giving, especially we're at the crux here in the next 10 days or so, about the information that we're going to give to the students on their return to school. So again, just to keep an eye out for that, and in particular, keep an eye out for chances for the children during the school day to regulate themselves. I think they're going to need a lot more chances to self-regulate themselves. A lot of children, their focus is not going to be on academia when we go back to school. Their focus is not going to be on the national curriculum. It's going to be on their own personal curriculum, which might necessarily be academic success. Their curriculum might be around their social, their emotional, their behavioral competency, and trying to get them to a space where they feel confident and relaxed in school. So again, the message in the unintended hidden message that was given back in March was that schools closed, which meant that they're not safe. We had to keep our distance from our teachers and our SNAs, which meant that those people were not safe. We had to keep a distance from our classmates and our friends, which meant that they're not safe. So now we're sort of flipping that message on its head. And again, we need to think of the perspective of the child in the context. So the perspective of the child in those situations is, now that we're putting them back into school, we need them to trust us that things are safer. And again, we can't sugarcoat things by saying things are 100% safe, because if they were 100% safe, I wouldn't be wearing a mask, or I wouldn't be wearing a visor, which is advised for school. And if you're in a post-primary school, Pete's going to talk about post-primary. about the social distancing that's needed at post-primary and the recommendation for masks. So now we need to change that message and change the context that home now is safe, and school now is becoming safer. So how do we turn it around? And again, we turn it around by what I would call SAM, which is basically we make our message safe, accurate, and meaningful. And again, we always look for, and again, anyone that's ever been on any course I've ever given would know that I'm quite often, I talk about creating calm. And what does calm look like? And how do we create calm? And again, for any teachers out there, and even parents out there, and even for autistic people that are watching this, what do I look like when I'm calm? Or what does Sean look like when he's calm? Or what does Jacob or Tom, what do they look like when they're calm? Because quite often what we find when we visit schools, or when I was an advisor visiting schools, teachers were often in a rush to tell me about what kids look like when they're not calm or when they're misbehaving. And I often just ask them to flip it on the head. Can you not just tell me what they look like when they are calm and sort of enjoying themselves? And can we not make that a bit better and make that feeling last longer, rather than to put people in situations where the stress, the anxiety is heightened? And I sort of just created this very, very basic chart last night for a fictitious student going back to school. And, so basically how can we create calm? And you see there, we've got before school, on the way to school, arrival at school, class time, break time, playtime, lunchtime, etc., etc. Now you can add or take away from that as you see fit. So again, what can I do myself? What can mom do? What can dad do? What can teacher do? And Mary is the SNA. I'm sorry if there are any Marys out there, and I don't mean to generalize there. But what we're saying there is, what can we all do to create calmness? Now, in this perspective, I'm talking about the child themselves, but we also need to look at, for myself, if I'm the mom or if I'm the dad, what can I do to make me feel calm about this coming back to school experience? As I'm the teacher, again, what can I do to make myself very calm? Because my calmness will then, I won't say rub off on the students, but it will certainly have an effect on the atmosphere and the environment of the school. And as we all know, the environment is called the third teacher. The environment is so important to teaching autistic children. And then for the SNA as well, and we have to include the SNA, because as we know, the SNA is the first port of call for many of our students and many of the issues that arise and feeding into mood changes, etc., and the amount of pressure put on a child. So again, when we talk about calm, I suppose the technical term for it is really regulation versus dysregulation. I just love to break it down to calm versus not calm. And we've got those proactive strategies there that we all know about, which is basically scheduled breaks. And we might need a lot more of those to start off with. This is completely new. We've never seen this before. And again, both the two guys before me, both Jacob and Tom, both spoke about this. This is new. We've never been here before. So a lot more movement breaks, sensory breaks. And again, I'll talk a little bit about sensory breaks as we go through the slides, because it might not necessarily mean the sensory room. Some schools are not using sensory rooms. So it might be to find individual sensory spaces if they're needed. Time to recharge. And then the last one, again, I've just added that in today. We're going to need more and more outside fresh air time. I think it might necessarily mean that parents might have to send in some wet gear for kids. So things like wellies and wet pants and a good raincoat, just to get kids out into the fresh air. Because again, just to circulate, again, we're told that circulating air through classrooms, etc., is going to be so important. But I think we're going to need a lot more outside breaks, just in order to stay anxiety-free and healthy. Access to sensory strategies, etc., like the fidgets that some children enjoy, and then teaching tools that we would normally use, like timers and visuals, etc. And then we've got the reactive sort of strategies there. So the heat of the moment, how do we prevent the escalation? So do we all of a sudden reduce the workload? Do we introduce a visual? Again, reduce your words. A picture says 1,000 words. And again, sometimes what we would find with a lot of the adults involved in the situation is they just talk too much. Language processing goes out the roof. And then we introduce proximity, which includes sensory overload. So we've got language overload, we've got sensory overload, we've got all sorts of overload. And then teachers turn around and wonder why did it happen? The use of headphones, and progressive relaxation techniques. And then we've got the recovery strategies from dysregulation. So we've got the comfort object, the safe haven, and the safe haven is going to be so important, I think. And, some children may choose to listen to music, etc. But that safe haven is going to be so important to identify as a staff working in conjunction, and again, like I said, we're all in this together, in conjunction with the parents, what that safe haven, and in conjunction with the students, what that safe haven will look like. So again, a calm, quiet space, and what does that look like? So again, it's just a quiet, protected space where the children can escape from the busy school environment. I've seen calm, quiet spaces in so many places in schools. In post-primary schools, you find them under staircases. In lots of primary schools, I've found them in the principal's office, because children have figured out that the quietest place in a school is actually the principal's office, because there's only one other person there. Excuse me, for use when the children are feeling overwhelmed, upset, or overstimulated. And how do we create it? Quiet, contained area away from busy areas. You can add comfortable items or whatever of the child's choosing. Soft rugs, pillows, blankets, bean bags, etc. We've often found that some of the, I suppose they're mats that you would find in some of the pet shops work fantastically well, especially for younger kids, because they're the perfect size. We would include calming toys and items for use in the space. And then how to use it? Again, a lot of pre-teaching involved, a lot of modeling involved, maybe even videoing. Teach the children how to use it in advance and creating rules, etc. And practice how best to use it when the children are in a calm state of arousal. And we invite them to use it then when they're upset, etc. Now, this, again, I would have had slides before, and I would have shown you what sensory rooms look like. And again, I spoke earlier, I mentioned earlier that from what I'm seeing online and what I'm hearing from colleagues in other schools is that in the interim, I think some of the sensory rooms are being shut down because of not being able to be cleaned adequately, etc. So I think what I'm going to do myself would be to have the calm, quiet space for each child at their desk, perhaps under their desk, under their own table. And they're very easily created. We can easily put curtains across the table, etc. Because each child in my class will have their individual table and workstation. And you can see from those two pictures there, they're lovely, calm, quiet spots. In particular, I love the one there with the two filing cabinets. A fantastic thing with the child's favorite items are in it. And again, the NCSE actually have lots and lots of fantastic resources for going back to school. I know they're fantastic resources because I created an awful lot of them. The problem is they weren't properly organized or properly advertised. So you can see there, if you go to the NCSE website, you will see there will be resources for summer provision, and if you click in the resources for tutors there, you will find those there, and there's some fantastic resources there. There are some board games, etc. But that first one there, getting started, my time at home, etc., was a board game basically that I created using the free download from widget.com, and you can see there are some of the topics there. So my time at home, which is where we're starting at the moment. So information sharing between home. There's a 10-day countdown to going back to school, which is fantastic. Things at home that I enjoy doing, or things. So basically that is a board game just that really talks about what happened in the past 6 months. And then the other one is things I liked, disliked in my home at time. And that can be a real information gatherer for teachers and staff in particular, because there might have been stuff that happened at home that we didn't know about, or there might be a new sort of passion that the child might have picked up. There might be a new topic that the child might have picked up, or even for just personal information that we wouldn't know. That there may have been a death that we didn't know about, etc. So just for those things, again, it's all about information gathering. I'm going right back again to what Jacob said about lack of information. Lack of information creates anxiety for us all. Misinformation can multiply that. And again, there's just a sample social story that I would have put up on the NCSE website. And you can see that there. So it's basically very, very simple. When you're writing social stories, again, I've been to lots and lots of schools. There are only 3 of us in Ireland that are actually trained to give social story training. So when I go to a lot of schools, I see the social stories are quite badly written, and they give a lot of misinformation, and basically are a lot of rules and negatives about what a child shouldn't be doing, and comparing them to their peers or comparing them to siblings, etc. So again, your social story should really just be safe, accurate, and meaningful and individualized to that child. So you can see that one there. It basically is exactly what I said on the tin there. It's safe, it's accurate, and it's meaningful for that child. It gives the information that they will need if you read through it, just that they are going back to school. And again, there's the reassurance there. I think the important word there is try. So if you see the fourth line from the bottom there, my teachers and the SNAs will try to make school like it was before. I will try to. Again, we're basically rewarding efforts there because we can't guarantee it will be like it was before. None of us can. And again, there's another sample of a social story there, social distancing in school. I have another one created for post-primary schools as well. So it is safe to go to school again. I will see some of my friends and teachers again. Excuse me. When we were in school, there will be different rules. This is okay. I have learned different rules before. So again, what you're doing by that line there is you're showing the child that, you know what, you've learned stuff before. This is okay, and you're more than capable of learning stuff again. So you've had success learning stuff before. This might be new. This might cause you anxiety, but we're very confident that if you try, that you can succeed. So some of the rules are called social distancing. My teachers can try to help me and the other children to learn the rules. And these rules will help to keep us healthy. I will try to remember the rules, okay? And again, that story would lead on to exactly what we mean by, is it 1 meter? Do I have to wear a mask? Do I have to wear a visor? You know, there might be a social story about my teacher wearing a mask and a visor. And again, I've been talking to some of the parents of the students who are coming into my class. Sorry, I'm going into their class, I should say. And again, I've explained that I will be wearing a mask and I will be wearing a visor. This website here, I know that Adam spoke earlier about the resource that AsIAm and SuperValu have put together. And this website here have fantastic resources as well, prepareme.ie, and they've got fantastic resources there. If you just see at the bottom, prepareme.ie resources COVID-19, and they've got some wonderful resources on that one about going back to school that I would recommend for you all, and they're free downloads. So if you just go to www.prepareme.ie, okay. Now, the importance of getting the message right for the return to school. The message has to be safe. So we're talking about, is the message safe socially for the child? Is it safe emotionally for the child? In other words, and is it understood? And is it safe physically? So we're not putting a child into any danger. So again, when we're talking about school, we have to make sure that those three things are covered. The next one that is incredibly important, and again, it brings me back to what Jacob was saying, is it has to be accurate. And this is going to go right to the wire, I think, because there are different pieces of information and snippets of information coming every single day. And we're getting different snippets and pieces of information from different schools about doing different things that will suit their own setup and their own context. And that's okay too. But the message has to be accurate for our context. When I say our context, for your own child's context, for your own school's context, and giving that message to the child. So again, we'll need guidance from the HSE and the DES. Now, there has been I suppose the program for going back to school from the DES, which has given a lot of accurate information around, say, physical distancing, hand washing protocols, etc., school numbers, the use of masks, gloves, PPE, transport, sharing books, toys, pencils, etc., and then the cleaning and the sanitizing of the same sort of materials. So again, when we're talking about accurate, and if there are any teachers or school managers there, about giving the accurate message, not just to the students, but also to the parents, because again, like I said before, this is completely new to us all. And the message has to be meaningful. So in other words, it has to be catered to the individual, to the child, and to add to their bank of safe information and to reduce their stressful occurrences. So just keep those three things in mind. You know, I always call it the SAM, you know, safe, accurate, and meaningful. And once we're giving that information, and you know, that information isn't just for autistics, that information is for every single person, safe, accurate, and meaningful. Anxiety. So again, I've spoken a lot about anxiety, as has our previous two speakers, as I'm sure will Pete Warmby when he follows me. So the cause of anxiety is, again, it's the lack of a full picture due to lack of information and the full explicit information. And that's really important, that word explicit. So what helps is basically giving as much information as possible. And again, for those neurotypical people watching in, sometimes we take it for granted that people have all the information when they don't have all that information. So again, it brings us back to basically the difference between learning via intellect and intuition, and via explicit information and implicit information. So again, if we have to give all that information intellectually, explicitly, always remember to give every single piece of information, even those pieces of information you take for granted because you think that, oh, sure, everybody knows that. Well, I'm sorry, everybody doesn't know that. And from what I'm hearing from a lot of third level students in college, autistic students, they're finding that that's a difficulty, the remote learning, and that they don't get the chance to go up and talk to their lecturers and ask them the explicit meanings of what was said. And I'm sure that that relates both to primary and post-primary students as well. We're going to see a fair bit more stimming. I'm taking a guess. And I think, again, that's going to be because there's just so much unknown about going back to school. So again, this is aimed more at teachers and SNAs, that you're going to see your children possibly stimming a little bit more. And again, for parents at home. And again, I suppose when we're talking about that, this is okay. You know, thank God, we're gone from the days where people forcibly try to stop people from stimming. The thing about stimming is that other people don't realize is that we all do it. And again, I often say on my courses, sit down and watch your family at nighttime watching television, and you'll see everybody's doing something, whether that's rubbing their hair or biting their nails or whatever. It's a form of stim. So again, the difference is the type, the quantity, and the obviousness of the behavior. And self-stimulatory behavior, again, serves a purpose for the student. So, for example, is it to regulate themselves? And again, we're probably going to see a lot of dysregulation, a lot of looking for that calmness. To escape sensory input. So again, it might be because of maybe perhaps there's a mask being worn or being asked to be worn. It might be because of the amount of cleaning products. And again, I find myself to be quite sensitive to a lot of cleaning products. And to express their emotions, excitement and frustration. And then there may be an underlying medical issue. This is the type of mask that I will probably be wearing myself. I have ordered them, and again, I found them on the Irish Deaf shop. I'm not here to promote any one company or website. I just found this one quite handy. And if you see the picture of the lady there, that is a reusable one. Sorry, that's not a reusable one. That's a once-off mask, and the black one in the bottom is a reusable one. And they, again, their prices will be on their website. I'm not here to quote prices of any product, but you'll find them yourselves on their website. But I would imagine a lot of teachers in autism support classes will be wearing this type of mask because again, it has been recommended that we wear masks. And again, just before I end, there are a number of different resources online about preparing to go back to school. And I know that Adam will be sharing the PowerPoint with you, or it's being recorded as well. But if you just look through some of those videos there from YouTube, there are plenty of tips there for hand washing, sensory integration. The tips there from the PDA Society in the UK, and from Studio.tv have been giving fantastic courses all over the course of the lockdown. Those other websites there, the ones about talking to children about COVID-19. Again, some of that, again, this is about not taking things for granted. We can't take it for granted that COVID-19 has been explicitly explained to students. And again, we may have to do that. Again, as teachers or as parents, we may have to do it because sometimes it comes to, we'll say, well, surely the parents have done it, or the parents might say, well, surely the school have done it. I think we can't take anything for granted in this situation. And we don't want to do overkill on COVID-19, but we do have to reiterate the point of the effect that it will have on everybody in our school environment. Okay, and then just this last one here, again, fantastic websites there. The sample lesson plans there from that website, the ebook.eu. There are fantastic websites for all levels of primary schools there, and even post-primary school, about learning about bugs, learning about hygiene, learning about viruses and what we can do to help them. And I mentioned earlier that I used widget.com to create a lot of the visual board games, etc., that I put up on the, I didn't put up, but the NCSE put up on their website. And again, I think there certainly was a 3-month trial period of free access to Widget. It's fantastic for creating the visuals, so I would suggest again that you might use that one. And any questions? I know there's a bit of a question and answer session at the end. That is my my email address. If anybody cares to email me after, I will help as much as I can, but also I'm in contact with Adam a lot. And again, I'd like to thank Adam for the privilege of letting me work with AsIAm again. Really looking forward to listening to Pete Warmby. I've been following Pete on Twitter a long time. He definitely looks a bit different tonight than he does in his profile. But again, I hope you enjoy it, and thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Sean. And that was just a fantastic presentation. And I think you've probably created an awful lot of very jealous parents who wish you were going to be teaching their child in the coming days and weeks with all the fantastic work and resources that you've already created. And the top question that's been coming through while you're speaking is, will your slides be available? So it's good to hear that they will be, and we'll distribute those. So thank you so much. Next, I'm delighted to introduce Pete and to say Céad Míle Fáilte, 100,000 welcomes, and to hand over to your good self.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak at this. Obviously, I'm going to be speaking from a UK perspective, but generally speaking, that just means that everything's going to be worse for us than they seem to be for you guys in Ireland. So just kind of, I think there's going to be a lot of similarity, a lot of crossover, and I'm going to try and make it as useful as I possibly can. And many thanks as well to Tom, Jacob, and Sean. Really useful, really insightful information there for, I think, everybody. This is going to be an unavoidable, difficult time. I think that's one of the hardest things about this. I don't see or believe that there is any easy way that we can get autistic students back into the classroom in primary, secondary, even at university. I think that there'll be a real challenge there, because everything that's happened has been a kind of the absolute worst thing really that could happen to an autistic person in some ways. You know, routines thrown completely out of the window, a source of extreme external anxiety, kind of enforced time spent you know, in the family home, which I think for a lot of autistic people can be quite tricky at times. And then, of course, everything being thrown right back again. It's like, oh, actually, now we're all going to go back into school all in one go. And we're going to deal with that, and we're going to try and make the best of it. And I think that this, as things go, you couldn't really ask for a more perfect storm of difficulties for your average autistic person. I mean, I know for myself, I'm absolutely dreading going back to work in a week and a bit's time. So we have to accept, I think, that there is going to be difficulty, that there is no magic bullet or easy way to make this work. All we can do is be flexible, be compassionate, and do our best to mitigate the obvious negative implications. So to focus on secondary school, I think we have to expect and understand that secondary school students will be in a slightly different situation to their primary not colleagues, their primary peers, if you like. I think they will be far more aware of what's been happening. I mean, I've got a 5-year-old who is admittedly quite switched on to what's going on. You know, she knows about what coronavirus is. She understands why we're having to stay in the home, etc. But I think when you're dealing with teenagers, there will be an awful lot more just kind of background knowledge there. But I think also, thanks to the wonders of the internet, there's a real danger that there's going to be an awful lot more misinformation among the secondary school students than there will be in the primary sector. So as Sean was saying, and I think Tom before that's something that we're going to have to be really, really careful of, to make sure that when we get everyone back into the classroom, that not just the autistic children, but that all of the teenagers are very likely to have all kinds of probably quite conflicting ideas about what's been happening, whether things were handled well, whether the whole thing was a good thing or a bad thing. You know, there are going to be kids who will have loved being at home for 6 months, and there'll be kids who hated every minute of it. So I think secondary is going to have a real challenge there, a real a tricky time to try to cope with the sheer variety of experiences that will be kind of all sweeping back into the classroom. But for the autistic children, I just want to focus a little bit now on the things that I certainly see being a likely source of particular difficulty, and what we can do to try to mitigate that as best as we possibly can. Obviously, if you've got any questions, just drop them in, write them into the Q&A system, and we'll try to answer them afterwards. I'm going to try and look at it from the teachers and parents' point of view. Obviously, some of it might be a bit more teacher orientated, but like I say, if it comes across too teachery and you want more parenty stuff, then please feel free to ask. So things that we're likely to see as being a real problem. I think we're going to have a lot of students who are going to struggle tremendously with the sudden change in routine. And I think that's going to be fairly extreme for a lot of autistic children, especially those, I mean, you know, we're not all the same, but a vast majority of autistic people like to have a set routine. And we've had 6 months to get into one. You know, to go from whatever our routine was before, back in the normal days before the event, to what we've kind of settled into now. You know, 6 months is a long time, and we've very clearly, most of us, I think, found our little niche. It might not be comfortable, it might not be perfect, but it's the best that we can make of it. And all of a sudden, we're going to be uprooting that and changing everything again, trying to get back into a routine that feels both very far away and also quite frightening given what's been happening. So I think the first thing that we need to be aware of is that change into routine has to be taken very, very seriously. Obviously, we can't do everything that we might want to do in this respect, but I think one of the most useful things that we can do for both autistic parents and autistic children is begin the change of routine as far before we go back to school as humanly possible. You know, don't leave it to the Monday morning, where all of a sudden, oh, you're getting up at 6 now, by the way, rather than 10. You know, we want to be really making that a kind of routine, that routine starting now, ideally, as much as we possibly can, and that's everything. And it can go as far as literally mimicking exactly what the eventual back to school routine will be. You know, breakfast at the right time, even getting changed into uniform. That's one thing that I'm going to be doing with my daughter. You know, getting her back into uniform just for the day at home, you know, a good week before she goes back, just to get that set of expectation and that routine settled back in again. I think that's really quite important. And then, of course, you've got the things like the journey to school as well. I mean, this is going to be very, very difficult if, depending on the circumstances, you know, if you get the bus in, if you get a taxi in, which I think is quite common, if you walk in, I think, again, that's going to be something that you're probably going to want to preempt and go over, you know, have a go at doing it in advance as far as you realistically can. I mean, it's a bit like as adults when we have an interview and we like to go and suss out the place first before we have our interview. You know, we drive over to wherever it might be and just kind of figure it all out so that it's not too stressful. I think something similar would be a really good idea for a lot of autistic teenagers, just to help get back into that routine. The other thing, of course, is the kind of the suddenness of going back in. I don't know exactly how it's going to work in Ireland. I know that in the UK, there is a general expectation that on the very first day of school, everyone is just back in as normal. You know, with no kind of mitigation for anyone that literally can't handle that. I would say that as far as you possibly can, if you're in contact with the school or if you're in contact with the people who can help you, see if there is some kind of way to get a more gradual, integrated return put into place. I mean, certainly the irony is, you know, if you have long-term sick, certainly in England, if you have a long time off sick, then you are reintegrated back into the workplace very gently. You know, you go back in for a morning here and there until you're back up to speed. And I think that for autistic children who will be suffering from, I think it's fair to say, extreme anxiety in some cases about not just the change in routine, but also the threat of coronavirus. That would be a real help. You know, just that feeling of, right, we are going to go in today. You know, we're going to carry on this routine that we've been doing now for a few days to get back into the routine. You are going to go in today, but only for the morning, say. I mean, I know that in terms of work and childcare and things like that might not be possible. But where it is possible, I would really recommend it. I think it would be very, very useful because it will help the autistic child just kind of recognize that they're not being asked too much. You know, the requirements are not quite so difficult to achieve, and it's amazing what an impact that can have. So yeah, kind of, rehearsals, I think, are a good idea. Rehearsals to get back into that kind of groove, in advance as far as possible. See if there is some way to integrate more kind of slowly. I mean, I don't know how it stands for you. I mean, certainly for us, if it came to it, if I found out that my daughter was really struggling one day, it would just be a simple case of keeping her off sick for the day. They're not like a formal agreement with the school or anything that, we're going to, do this and this. Just they can't do it today. They just can't. And I think there has to be a kind of recognition that maybe that's okay. You don't want, obviously you don't want it to become a regular thing, and school refusal can be a very difficult thing to manage. But your children, and if after the first day they are completely like, I don't want to go back in today, I'm just overwhelmed, I think that take that seriously and think, well, actually maybe it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to take a day or a morning or an afternoon just to make things more straightforward and more gradual and gentle. I think that in these times of unprecedented stress, things like that have to be acceptable. But what about when they actually get there? I think that, again, I mentioned earlier that the pandemic is probably the worst thing that could happen to autistic people in some ways. In other ways, it's really good. I mean, I've had plenty of time with my hobbies and things like that. I mean, that's been quite nice. But I think school after COVID, how schools are going to be set up, both for yourselves in Ireland and in the UK, because I think there's quite a lot of similarities, bubbles and things like that, that a lot of it will not suit autistic children very well. And we need to be aware of that. We need to be prepared to deal with that when it eventually occurs. So, for example, we have to understand that a lot of autistic children in particular are going to come back, and they're going to come back quite scared. They will have probably a better understanding of COVID, some of them, than you would expect. It wouldn't be beyond the realms of possibility that for some autistic children, COVID and the ways to try and combat it, that may well have become a bit of a special interest recently. That's possible. I think we have to be prepared for the fact that autistic children, even more than the rest of the cohort, will be likely feeling a considerable amount of fear over the likelihood of contracting the illness, what will happen if they do contract it, and other things too, like what impact them catching it will have on the rest of their year group. I mean, don't ignore people that say autistic people have no empathy. The idea of being that one person that shuts the school down or a whole year group down or something like that would be a source of tremendous anxiety for an autistic child, I think. So I think having kind of mature, open conversations at home and at school about aspects around that fear would be a very good idea. So, for example, being quite clear about things like the rates of infection. I mean, certainly here we have, if we know where to look, we have quite detailed information about, where cases are, which parts of the country are having more cases than others. If you're lucky enough to live in a part of the country where cases are very, very low, then share that information. That kind of logical approach of, here is the data, here is the information. Okay, and as you can see, there's only 2 people or whatever in this area that have contracted it, and the chances of you coming into contact with those 2 people is extremely low. I think that could be quite useful. That's the kind of thing that I know a lot of autistic children that I teach would appreciate. Being treated like adults, being treated like knowledgeable, able people who can make decisions tends to be a really, really quite powerful tool. Sorry about that. Another thing to bear in mind, though, with this fear is that it obviously might be rather extreme, and they might be really, really quite scared of the consequences of coming down with the illness too. So it might not be a bad idea to kind of go through what that actually consists of. I think there can often be a feeling that if you share this information with a child, then it will scare them even more. If you tell them what the monster under the bed looks like, then that makes the monster even more frightening. But I'm not sure that's always necessarily the case. I think if you actually are open and you share and you say, well, yeah, okay, bad cough, losing sense of taste, etc., etc. I think that might go quite a long way to just settling nerves a little bit. Again, that whole thing about autistic children wanting to be taken seriously and wanting to be given information, you know, wanting to hold all of the information that they require for their situation can be quite a strong thing. Another thing that you might want to consider, and I'm kind of just going through a list really here. I will be, if AsIAm are okay with this, I will be kind of writing this up afterwards, you know, and I can get it out to everybody. I'm not prepared enough to do things like presentations and things like that. Another thing to bear in mind is the whole idea of justice and fairness and that kind of thing. There's a high likelihood, I think, with autistic people having a very kind of keen sense of right and wrong and fairness, especially, you know, kind of reasonableness. I think it's likely you might come across quite a few students who are very cross about the idea of having to go back into school. They might perceive that it's still too dangerous and it's too soon, and that, you know, the government requesting this of us is something that is unreasonable and unjust and all the rest of it. And I think, you know, again, take those points of view seriously. You know, that's not just a student, a child looking for an excuse to, you know, cause a fuss. That will be a very real feeling of, this isn't right, you know, this shouldn't be happening, this is silly. And I think kind of, again, talking through that, going through the data, going through the reasons, talking about what would happen if cases did go back up, you know, reassuring that obviously we would just lock back down like a turtle back into its shell, you know, to protect ourselves again, would be quite reassuring. Another area where you might get an issue with the justice idea, of course, is things around PPE and masks in particular. And I think that might be a bigger thing in Ireland than it is in England, because at the moment we're not really being recommended to wear masks in school, for reasons that are sort of beyond my comprehension and that I don't entirely agree with. But if there are a lot of masks being worn in school, I can certainly foresee that there will be situations where autistic children will notice either somebody is wearing a mask or isn't wearing a mask when they shouldn't, and we'll probably be quite unhappy with that. I could certainly imagine some of the students I teach, if say a teacher walked into the room, you know, without a mask on, and everyone else is sitting there with masks on, you know, that could destroy the lesson, you know, and quite rightly so in some ways. Because, you know, the kind of double standards issue will be very, 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 very powerful for a lot of autistic children. You know, that is not fair. That is not okay. So I think schools need to be very, very aware, and parents, I suppose, could work to push this, you know, by contacting the schools and saying, look, you know, a really big thing that has to be happening in this school is no double standards. You know, we have to have complete consistency. Because, you know, at the end of the day, it will be the autistic children who will pick up on that. They will notice it. It will anger them, like I say, in my opinion, quite reasonably. And that will have knock-on effects. I mean, I personally believe that a lot of the time that autistic children end up in detention, or being excluded, or worse, is often because of some perceived injustice that they've noticed that they can't let lie. I mean, I've seen autistic children shouting at a head teacher before because the head teacher had, in my opinion, been very unreasonable. That's something that we have to be aware of. And I think as parents, being in touch with schools and saying, look, you know, there really has to be consistency in everything. PPE, in cleaning, in making sure that everything is done exactly how you say it's going to be done. I think that would nip a lot of potential problems in the bud quite nicely, if it's something that can be managed. Other things. One thing that I'm particularly concerned about, from a teacher and a parent's point of view, is the fact that with the bubble system, I don't know whether many of you have found this, but autistic children very often don't necessarily hang around with the kids you'd expect them to. You know, they don't necessarily have their little group of best friends in their tutor group, in their year group. Very frequently, autistic children will kind of choose their friends and choose their relationships from the kind of full gamut of who is available in that school environment. So I think we could end up in a situation where there's going to be a lot of autistic students who will find themselves unable to see or spend time with their usual group of friends, or their usual kind of maybe just one or two people that they hang around with and that they're friends with, very, very close, very, very, feel very safe with them. And all of a sudden, they're in a different bubble. So lessons, lunchtime, break time, there's going to be no contact. I think that's the sort of thing I feel, is liable to be missed and to be kind of not picked up on by staff, in a school beforehand. So I would recommend, that if you feel that might be the case for your child, that you talk to them a little bit, oh, what year group are your friends in? Where do you go at lunchtime, and who do you spend time with? Because I think it could be that there will be situations where they will not be able to be spending the time with the people they normally would. And that's going to be extremely difficult. It's going to be bad enough going back into school and dealing with the stress and the strain of that. If you can't even spend time with your mates, or your two close friends that you like to talk about manga with, break time in the library because the library's closed because the library's being used for something else. I think students need to be fully prepared for that. They really do. I think that needs to be taken into account. I think parents and teachers need to go over the ramifications of that with them to make sure that when they are going into school, for that integrated kind of slow reintegration back into the system, that they know that they may struggle to find that time with their friends, and maybe they will be able to have that time with their friends, after school or before school. Make sure they walk to school together or something like that. Obviously, COVID permitting. Sorry about my hair. There's nowhere to get it cut, and I'm using the excuse. So yeah, that's something that I think is problematic. I think also the flip side of that is that you might find autistic students will be kind of stuck in a room with the wrong people. In some circumstances, in these bubbles, they'll find themselves, if they're, for example, with their tutor group the whole time, or with their English group the whole time, or whatever it might be. It might be that they have some real problems with the people in that group, and normally, of course, they would have breaks from them. Certainly in England, they'll have a design lesson or a technology lesson with a different group of kids, or they'll go and do history as an optional subject with a completely different, class. If they haven't got that kind of break built into their timetable, that kind of period of relief from potential, bullies, possibly, autistic children suffer bullying terribly, because we don't fit in the way that other children expect us to. I think that there's potential there for problems too. So again, it's about preempting that. It's about noticing that, knowing about it. Forewarned is forearmed, and all that kind of thing. Just to make sure that, there are going to be problems. You are going to find yourself probably in a room with people that you don't like, and you're going to be in there for longer than you would normally prefer to be. So what can we do to make that better? Well, make sure you've got your doodle pad with you. Make sure you have some way, you've got your headphones. Make sure that teachers are allowing them to wear their headphones in these situations. Or their ear defenders, whatever it is that they use. I think there has to be compassion there. There has to be compassion at the very heart of all of this. And as parents, you can put pressure on the school to make sure that these things are happening the way they ought to be happening. I really feel if my child is coming back in September, they need to be able to wear their headphones while they're working quietly, because otherwise, they'll get distracted by the constant noise. They'll have, I don't know, some kid in the corner just constantly saying their name just in a kind of vain attempt to annoy them. And you need to be able to turn off from that and escape from that. And if they won't be able to go off at lunchtime, to their usual place or go off with their usual group of friends, then they're going to need other ways to switch off and escape for a time. Autistic people are incredibly good at escaping from stress if you let them. And that's the thing. We have these defense mechanisms built in that, I, for example, if I'm in a tricky spot, can just kind of escape through a back door in my head into, I don't know, whatever I fancy, really. Listen to some music or something along those lines. But the trouble is, when we see autistic children doing that, because they often, for example, go very quiet or kind of gaze out of the window, there's a tendency to, what are you doing? Pay attention, stop that and write something down. And I think there has to be, again, compassion there. Let the autistic child do what they know they need to do to save themselves from what could be a difficult situation. You know, they don't want to go into meltdown. They don't want to have to struggle with this. They want to be able to, you know, kind of escape. I think I've got 5 minutes left, so just a few more things. I think from a parent's point of view, expecting difficulties, as I'm sure you all already are, is going to be the most healthy kind of way of approaching this. You know, that there isn't going to be, unless you're very, very lucky or the stars align or whatever it might be, there won't be an easy kind of transition back into term time in September at all. That's just not going to happen. So we have to expect the worst, hope for the best, perhaps. Make sure we spend a lot of time prepping, talking through what's likely to be happening, going over the potential issues for anything really, from, you know, what's lunchtime going to be like? I mean, if I go on a training course somewhere, even as an adult, if I don't know what lunchtime is going to be like, that is going to be the only thing I think about for the first 4 hours of the course, because I need to know. It's not just because I care about the food, although I do. It's because that is a thing that's coming. It's a barrier, a potential barrier that's coming that could be unassailable. You know, it could be just too much to handle. So just tiny little things like, you know, do you know what you're going to do at lunchtime? Do you know what the school have said? Have a look at what the school's policy is. Schools should have produced some kind of policy, I would hope, saying what they believe their planning will be, you know, what their systems will be. I know we're, for example, going into this kind of very staggered break and lunchtime where basically at any one point in the school day there are going to be some kids on their break, which will be interesting. But the kids need to know about that in as much advance as possible. And finally, I think just before I finish, they will have had a lot of time on their own, probably. A lot of autistic children will have probably spent this time indulging in their favourite interests, and will all of a sudden be expected no longer to be able to do that to any kind of similar degree. So I would say, and I agree with Sean here entirely, because I think he mentioned this about, you know, when you go back in, when the kids are back in, talk to them. I think one of the most useful and valuable things that teachers can do for their autistic students returning back is to take a little bit of time and say, so, you know, it's been 6 months. Wow. What have you been doing? You know, what have you learned? What have you found out about? What are you passionate about now? Because it almost certainly will have changed for a lot of children. And we love talking about our interests. We love it. And if there's one that's guaranteed to get our guard down, you know, and to help bridge, you know, that gap, so that 6-month gap between teacher and student communication, asking about, you know, are you still into Pokemon? Are you still into Fortnite? Are you still, you know, reading up on, I don't know, insects or whatever it might be? And listen, actually take it in. Listen carefully, engage, and get some idea, you know, and kind of bond a little bit over that, just to help that transition. I think that's about it for me. I think I'm meant to finish in a few moments. So thank you for that. I'll be sticking around for the question and answer, of course. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pete. I think that was hugely insightful, and lots of people commenting really favourably about it. And I think lots of very practical ideas for people to think about. And I have some questions here for you as well. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you again in a few moments. So thank you. We've lots of questions, which is great. And I'd invite any of our panelists who wanted to maybe turn their cameras back on now at this stage, because we'll be chopping and changing a little bit between each person. I'd ask people to try and keep their answers short, because I'm going to try and get to as many questions as I can, because there's been some really good questions raised. We won't get to every question, so as I said, if we don't, please feel free to get in touch with us separately, and we'll try and advise you as best as we can. Where I wanted to start is 2 young people who are actually on the spectrum, students who are looking to return to school, ask questions. So I want to prioritize those questions first of all. And the first question, I suppose, is about a young person who really feels they've fallen behind during the lockdown period. They found it quite difficult to engage in learning during that time. And they're very anxious about returning to school, but perhaps even more anxious about, what if we have to go back to blended learning again and I fall even more behind? So I don't know if any speaker would like to address that question.
Sorry, Jacob, you put your hand up first.
We'll hear from Jacob and Pete.
Sure, no, he can go. He can go first.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if it were, one thing to bear in mind, of course, is that it's one of those very rare situations where everybody's been in the same boat, and though some students will have taken to home learning very well, I think it's fair to say that the majority probably won't have done. It won't have worked very well for a large number of people. So one thing to bear in mind is that yes, you may well have not been able to do very much recently, but it doesn't necessarily mean you've fallen behind, because no one really else has moved forward very much either. And I think that's important to remember, because otherwise you can feel very lonely, and there's no need to feel lonely in this because there's so many people in the same situation. If we go back to blended learning, then yes, of course, again, you don't want to fall further behind. But I think one thing to bear in mind is that schools certainly should, I know that we are, for example, be way more prepared now for going back into that than we were, for us back in mid-March, when it was a shock and where we didn't know what we were doing and it was kind of chaotic, from a teacher's point of view. So I think, with a bit more kind of clear guidance from your teachers, and resources that have kind of been purpose made over the summer and over the term 5 and term 6 back last year, you'll probably find that you're going to be given and getting a much higher quality of kind of tasks and work than you got last year, because we've learned from our mistakes. We know what works better now. That won't necessarily help if your home environment is not conducive to learning, but it might help a little bit. And again, remember that you will not be alone in this. That everyone is in the same situation.
Thank you so much. Jacob, do you want to add something there?
He pretty much summarized my points, to be honest.
Okay, no problem at all. So the next question is, we have a young person who's just said very simply that they're very worried about the return to school. And I might just couple that with a parent who's just spoken about a young person who really hasn't left the house for an extended period of time during lockdown owing to anxiety. What advice would you have, and I might ask Sean to address this, on really helping people take that first step back? How can we allay the worry and give people the confidence to go in on day one?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Yeah, and I think too, if Pete wants to join in at any point in this, because it actually does sound like it's an older student, but yeah, I suppose again it's putting it back that we're all sort of feeling this this anxiety about getting out there. I think Pete mentioned it as well, that for a lot of our students with autism, it actually brings me back to what Jacob said earlier as well. For a lot of students, autistic students, lockdown has been a good thing because they haven't been put under pressure socially. The hidden curriculum, that nasty stuff in school that that we're all meant to just pick up, but that a lot of autistic students really, really struggle with. And I think Jacob mentioned earlier about being in post-primary school. The good thing about it is I know I'll get out of it. I think I'm paraphrasing you there a little bit, Jacob, but
no, that's exactly it. That was one of the main reasons. I knew it couldn't last forever.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, and I suppose when we're talking about the student, the young person that you're talking about there, Adam, that the extreme pressure that they're finding themselves under right now is quite understandable. We're going to have to be very, very patient with this student. We're not forcing anybody to go back to school. And I thought Pete's advice there about kids, even if it's 10 minutes, to build up to 15 minutes, to build up to half an hour, to build up to whatever, we have to be so patient. And I'm not just talking about the younger kids here. I'm talking about, actually, in particular, what we find with a lot of our students in Ireland is that post-primary school is way more difficult than primary school. The anxiety levels, and Adam, I know from your own perspective as well, you've spoken about this, but sometimes the social aspect, the social expectations plus the academic expectations, we can see that wall being hit. So it sounds awful to say this, it's quite common, but that's from the child's perspective. I think from an educator's perspective, from a parent's perspective, is the first thing we can give is to say to the child that I believe you. Because sometimes a lot of people, it feels like no one believes them. And it brings me back to one of the slides earlier about perspective taking. So I think it's incumbent on all of us, the adults involved, the friends involved, whoever, the siblings involved, to take on the perspective of the student that, you know what, this might be an impossible task right now. But what we need to do then is to build up those supports, those gradual supports. And it might not just be supports from an education perspective. We might need mental health experts as well. We might need family help. We might need the experience of someone like Adam Harris, like Jacob, like Tom, like Pete. We might need other people who have been through similar experiences. So if anyone else wants to jump in on that one.
Something for that, for
Yeah,
both of them. In regards to the one who hasn't been outside since lockdown started, like I can 100% understand that. Like I think I spent like a fair few weeks before I actually went outside, just because there was a lot of stuff going on personally and all that, and so it was very hard for me to start going outside and walking up to the shops and all that. But that was actually one of the things that got me. I want something from the shop. So that can be a good thing, like motivation. I've been answering a few of the Q&As because obviously we can't get to them all, unfortunately. And a big thing I've been saying to them is motivation. So for whoever this person is who can't go out, maybe it's if you want to ease them into it, maybe like if you go up to the shop, you could buy yourself a Freddo or something that they like. If you walk this much or spend this much time outside the house, we'll do something here. If you go to school and do your stuff, you'll get good grades, so maybe you can get the course you want. Stuff like that can be, huge incentives. Again, that's what got me through school as well. I had the incentive of looking to do well on my exams, so I could go to college and do the course I wanted. And in regards to the other one who is worrying, like very anxious about going back, all I can advise, like, because in my thing I said a lot about like how I felt anxiety through lockdown, and only really when school kind of ended and we stopped hearing from people did that go away. So, and even now I feel anxiety when I was doing my bit of the talk, because I'm talking to over 100 people. It's my first time. So what I'd recommend for anxiety is just sort of facing it and pacing yourself, take your breaths, find ways to comfort yourself. I've been doing a lot of hand movements underneath the camera that have been out of view. They've been helping me personally to deal with the anxiety of talking to this many people at once. So, find what works for you. If that's a stim, if that's some sort of sensory thing, find what works for you.
Thank you. Really good advice. As well, I'll just say that Rose Bracken has reported that she's very lucky that Sean is actually going to be teaching her boy next year, and she's delighted about that, and understandably so. Another couple of questions that I think people will have a good bit to contribute on in relation to this. The whole issue of face masks, PPE, very specific rules about the guidelines. There's been a lot of those questions, and some of them, if we don't get to them, I'd ask you to email info@asiam.ie, because some of the responses are quite technical, so I want to make sure we get you the correct information. But just one issue that is coming up a lot is face masks, and as people may be aware, AsIAm did meet with Minister Madigan on that this week, and we have got clarity that for students who a face covering will cause distress for, there will not be a requirement to wear a face covering. But a good question that has been raised twice this evening, and I think it's a question we are going to have to work together to unpick. I think what the youth leadership team have been doing with their campaign is helpful in this regard, and I'd like to hear what both a youth perspective but also a teacher perspective on this. A child who really needs reassurance about, for example, can't wear a face covering, finds it very difficult to manage hand sanitizer, is really looking for reassurance that's okay, that it's okay he can't manage the face covering. And in another instance, I suppose a concern that a child who isn't able to wear a face covering may very well actually find themselves as a possible person who could experience bullying, and how can we prevent those sort of circumstances emerging within our school communities? So I don't know who would like to go first on that, but I think everyone probably has something to contribute.
You first?
Yeah. I think for the first bit, I think that is a very good point. The idea of, I can't wear a face mask and that is bad. You know, that makes me a bad person. It's a very common kind of train of thought for autistic people, I think. You know, that we kind of internalize the things that we struggle with, and we assume that's a bad thing, it's a negative. And it can be very corrosive, it can be very unpleasant. I think, you know, we have to kind of catch that and say, no, actually, you know, there are going to be plenty of people who can't wear masks, and go down. I don't really want to talk about herd immunity because it's still got such horrible connotations, especially for us over here. But the whole idea of, you know, vaccinations kind of working around the idea that not everyone can have them, but the more people that do have them, the safer everybody is. So kind of going down that line and just explaining that it is okay if a few people don't wear masks. What's important is that the majority wear masks. And if the majority do wear masks, then everything is a little bit, you know, that everything is inherently a bit safer because of that. Just to take away that kind of personal feeling of guilt and shame that could cause real problems, I think. You know,
so what you're trying to say is, while it's not 100% required, if you or someone you know isn't wearing a mask while you're next reader, try to at least be more considerate about not doing something stupid like accidentally coughing in front of someone and instead covering it up somehow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really important, I think, that everyone does what they can to the fullest extent possible. Absolutely. Jacob, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, I think because there is sort of a key thing for autistic people to do as well, because like there's a temptation for me with this as well. For example, shops, you can get fined by the guards if you don't wear a mask while in the shops, which is fair enough. But I didn't know about that the first time I was there, so I had to use the fact that I had autism and all that to avoid getting said, to avoid getting into having issues over it. But I am someone who's able to wear a mask. So if you can wear a mask, like, and you have autism or whatever, like, even just because you have the ability to not do it, like, if you can, like, you know, don't just think I have autism, I mustn't be able to do it. Like, give it a try. If it doesn't work, fair enough, do that. But like, at least so then you can say, you know, because I think that's what a lot of people I know have been accused of, who do actually struggle with things like I don't like hand sanitizer, so I can't use that, and I've been accused of just not trying it or whatever. I've tried it, it sets me off sensory, so I don't use it. Like, so I can now say that. So I think that's a huge thing.
And I think building on that point is very good. You know, one thing I saw, people might be familiar with Graham Manning, a teacher in an autism class, was tweeting during this week about how one of the things he's done with his autism class is bring in a variety of different types of face coverings. It doesn't have to be a mask. There's different options out there, and giving the people to the space to experiment sensorially about what works for that person, I think is something worth thinking about. We're just going to do another 5 minutes of questions, if that's okay. Just there's another couple that I'd really like to address, if possible. One question that just has arisen that I think really relates to Sean's presentation is, a parent wants to know around social stories. Is that something they should prepare as a parent, or is it something that they should ask their school to prepare for them? Or would you have any recommendations in that regard?
Hi, Adam. Yeah. I think the important thing about social stories is what I said earlier, is that I've seen social stories abused in that they're written the wrong way. They're written in order to keep children under control. Social stories aren't about that. Social stories are about giving accurate information, exactly what I said earlier: safe, accurate, meaningful. And sometimes, you know, I've been given social stories that are basically like a Leaving Cert essay. There's just way too much information, and it's completely overwhelming. What we need to give in a social story is exactly what I said. What are we actually looking for in this situation? And sometimes that's just the tiniest piece of information, but it's explicit information that we take for granted. Not overly long. Sometimes a social story can be only about 10 sentences. Social articles are written for teenagers and adults. And again, you know, I'm still writing social stories and social articles for adults, you know, as we speak. I think the important thing is that I suppose the question was, do I as a parent or does the school? It would be great if they could be done together with some form of collaboration, whether that's between a homeschool diary, which I don't think will happen this year because of a book going back and forth. I think things like, those communication websites. I forget what they're called now at the moment. We were using them all over the summer. But the communication between home and school would be good for writing because what you're really trying to do there is what we would call the information finding part of the social story, which is basically, who do I consult for the information? So I consult the parent, I consult the teacher, I consult the SNA, I can consult the child themselves, I can consult the
Dojo.
kids. Sorry?
Class Dojo, someone thinks.
Class Dojo, yeah. I mean, there are a number of them. Class Dojo is a good one. Seesaw was the one, sorry, that I was thinking of. So yeah, again, that's the collaboration between the parents and the children. And again, context is really, really important because, as we know, and the guys will probably attest to this as well, that you know Peter Vermeulen well, Adam. He talks about context blindness an awful lot, about children will learn in one context and not transfer that skill to another. So therefore, the social story that a parent might write might work in the context of the home situation, but might not work in the school context, and vice versa. So probably didn't answer your question.
No,
but
I think
really,
that's helpful. Yeah, absolutely.
the important thing, Adam, is that it's individualized. Sorry.
Totally.
Yeah.
Another question that's arisen, and I think I definitely like to hear from Jacob and Tom on this, and if Pete or Sean wants to come in as well. A parent wants to know, how can we support a young person, be it them learning online or be it learning in the classroom, to have the confidence and the skills to be able to advocate for themselves and explain their own needs in situations that they need to. Obviously always important, and something that I think is often not done enough, but probably particularly important in the months ahead when people might encounter difficulties.
Ooh, that's a hard one. Tom, do you want to go first, or can I?
I might not know much, but I'm just gonna give what I can think of.
Sure, go ahead.
Try to see if you can have them to keep a schedule on what they need to do for their class, whether it be the timetable that they would normally have, or even give them their own schedule that they can keep track of at home. Also, maybe see if you can try and have updates between each other so that you can also keep an eye yourself.
Thank you very much for that.
I'm going to focus a bit more on the self-advocation part, because that's actually something that that's actually the point of the YLT. It was in the initial stages, it was to teach our members about self-advocation. And sorry, my phone's just playing up. And that's something that actually I've done a fair bit throughout my life. Unfortunately, there have been instances in my school where they have tried messing me around. There have been cases where I've had to explain why I need an SNA, or what I need to help from them for, or why I need to take time out, all these things. And I think it's just sort of knowing what you need, and then unfortunately a fair bit of trial and error in terms of communicating. So maybe practice on your parents, or whoever you have, guardians, siblings, uncles, aunts, whoever you can do it with. Like a lot of times, if I had an issue and I wanted to discuss it with teachers, I'd say, hey, mom, dad, can I run this by you? And I'd say it, and I'd be like, does that sound like something that makes sense? Or what's the thing? What do I need to do to make it understandable to everyone else? And it's also just a lot of sort of biting the bullet. Like, it's obviously very hard to talk sort of back to teachers or adults or authority figures about what you need, because normally we're used to being the case where if we don't stand out, don't be different, because you don't want to be singled out in front of the class, but at the same time, it affects your education. So you need to, so it's kind of just, it's a bit of a balancing act and trial and error, but if you put in the work, you can learn. There's no 100%, it is possible, and I think every person I've met with autism has been able to do it once they put in the work.
So it's like a mix of trying to keep track of everything that you have, as well as trying to figure out through trial and error the channels you can get to if you ever find yourself in trouble or something.
The trial and error is more in communicating to people, because here's the thing, your issues, but it's the other people who don't. Your parents more than likely know you, but the teachers and the principals and SNAs and all that, they have had other students that they've been with. They might deal with like 30 plus students on a daily basis. So you need to learn how to explain to them. And that's the thing. Through practice and through knowing what you need and what you need help with and what you can handle with yourself. Like, I didn't go to my SNA with stuff that I couldn't handle myself. I only did it with stuff that I needed help with, you know? No, if you can do it yourself, try. If you can't, you know, say it in the best way you can, like, that makes sense to you. Maybe ask people who you trust, is what I'm saying makes sense? Explain to them maybe explain to your parents, I need this thing, and maybe they can explain it to principal or the teachers or the SNA or whoever for you. Or maybe you can take it as an opportunity to, you know, that's where the self I'm trying to think of the word.
Advocacy.
The self-advocacy comes in. You can learn yourself and then pay attention to, if you have your parents do it, pay attention to what they say and how they do it. If you can do it yourself, try that, you know. Maybe don't go to the parents 100% of the time to talk to teachers. Try yourself, you know.
Super.
Sorry, Adam, can I just come in on that one just briefly? I know we're coming to the end, but when you asked that question, immediately the guy who popped into my head was the work of Damien Milton, and I know that Damien has worked with you guys before, and the whole double empathy issue and perspective taking. And I think if there are any educators listening in here, to look up the work of Damien Milton, because I think from the youngest age possible, we need to start working on that, communicating what's in my mind, and for the teacher as well to say, well, this is what's in my mind, and this is what it could be what's in your classmates' mind. This is when the principal is giving out to you in this situation, well, what's going through her mind? You know, it's not saying that children with autism lack empathy like we used to say all those years ago. We are now down the road of the double empathy issue where, you know, neurotypical people would also lack empathy towards the feelings of autistics. Exactly what Jacob has just described there. I won't say exactly, but I think it's along those lines.
That's what I was trying to go for.
Thanks, Jacob. Yeah.
Just the very final question of the evening. I think it's a good question, and it's something we haven't addressed directly. So, you know, there's people who are listening and they're in the context of they're going back to the school they were in, and that's a challenge in and of itself. But I think one particular challenge is maybe some young people who were in primary school who are now going to be going to secondary school. And of course, it's the same for early years into junior infants, or indeed secondary school into university. Any particular advice for young people who are transitioning from one stage of the education system to another? Sean or Pete, would you like to come in on that?
I'll let you go ahead there, Pete. Don't be in a
Oh, sorry, I was on mute.
No. Sorry, no, I was on mute as well. Go ahead, Pete. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, it's the transition from primary to secondary that's the worry. Usually there will be things like summer school and kind of opportunities at the end of the last school year to go up and have a look around, and of course very little or none of that will have happened. So I think really and truly everything that I said about autistic students generally, but kind of turned all the way up to 11 really, you know, really very, very, very gentle integration. I think throwing in for us, you know, it'd be a year 7 student straight away into a secondary school environment that they're not familiar with, that will not work. There is pretty much no way that is possibly going to work properly. So I think there needs to be a lot more of a dialogue between parents and school to ensure that there's a more realistic kind of opportunity just to go in, even if it's just for, you know, a lesson or so to begin with, just to you know, the routines and how it works.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Yeah, and I too, Adam, as well. And again, I know the time is running out, but I think we all have to realize too that at the moment, the majority of schools are like building sites. So even that thing of of getting children in for a day before everyone else comes in, the things that we would normally have done, and you can even see it for, say, junior infant kids in mainstream schools who would have been brought in traditionally for a day in June. It hasn't happened, and I know some schools are trying to bring them in, etc. And in particular for our ASD kids, perhaps even look up the school website for as much information as possible, talk to previous students. But with that, the caveat is that it's still going to be different, because there might be one-way systems in a school for the first time. There might be only one entrance, one exit for the first time. So it's just going to be so much different. Again, it's all about getting that information, isn't it? And unfortunately, some of that won't be there until we actually enter on the first day.
And that just brings me very nicely to kind of closing out, because there's a few questions we've got about things like, integration. How will it work a child moving from an autism class to a mainstream class? We raise these issues with the department, and we understand that that integration will still be encouraged and will be possible, but we've asked for a guidance document to be issued on some of these issues. So hopefully we'll see that in the next week or two, and it will help and inform people. And also, if people have more of those sort of technical questions, if they can email us, because I want to make sure we give you accurate answers. But for now, I just want to thank people so much for joining us this evening. It's great to see the really positive feedback that's really streaming in. I want to say a particular thanks to Jacob and Tom. Certainly, from the point of view of the organisation, we're extremely proud of you and your contribution here this evening in particular, and we're very grateful. And for Sean and Pete for sharing your huge expertise. It's just fantastic, and I know it's been really valuable for people. We'd certainly love, Pete, if you want to write up a piece following on from tonight. And Jacob and Sean very kindly agreed to share their notes as well this evening as well. So we will get that out to you in the coming days. We have everybody's email who registered to attend. So thank you all so much. Of course, we want to wish people the very best of luck next week or the week after as you start back into the classroom. It is so important, and with all the right work, I'm sure it will go well and it will benefit people. And once again, encourage people to check out our Bridge Back to School resource and the other resources that were mentioned tonight in informing your preparation. And I want to say a big thank you to SuperValu for sponsoring this event and for giving us